Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 49, Blade Runner Movie Review. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancy Eaton. As always, this is Pop Goes Your World. Before we get started, just if you want to reach out to us on Twitter, you can do so at CMcBrien or at Yancy Eaton, or you can always head over to the website, popgoesyourworld.com. All of our contact information is there. Shoot us an email. Reach out to us any way you want. Yancy, we have a guest this week, but before we get to our guesses, what's going on, my friend?
What's going on? The huge. I am inside my shed. I still don't have an AC unit, despite my wife and I talking about it. I brought a little mini cooler out today with like some refreshments and stuff.
What kind of refreshments do we have in the cooler tonight?
Adult alcoholic beverages.
Nice.
I forgot to bring the box cutter. Listen, I think I'm out. I forgot to bring the bottle opener out, so I literally just like popped off a bottle with hedge clippers, like a true gangster. When you want beer bad enough, you're willing to do crazy things, but. That's basically what's new. We talked a little bit off air. I've been watching that new Ozark movie or Ozark TV series on Netflix.
I hear it's really good.
That's pretty awesome. I went and watched Dunkirk. Also amazing.
Ooh,
Holy
nice.
cow, is that an amazing movie? Oh my God, yes. But other than that, just the same old retail grind, dude. What's good with you?
Oh, not much. I find it very interesting when you see these historical movies where you know what happens, but it's still they're able to sort of grip you and stuff. It's like when you see Titanic, the ship sinks, but it's still, the movie gets you, right? So, no, I heard Dunkirk is really, really good. And it's obviously one of the most amazing stories of World War II, that's for sure. Not much new with me. Me and the family, we decided we wanted to watch something new. So, my wife and I are watching Breaking Bad, as I mentioned. We're really loving it. We're into season 2. It's going good. But then we were like, we got to have something we've got to watch with the kids, on a rainy day and stuff like that. So what we decided to do was, it was actually my wife's idea. I wanted to go back and watch The Love Boat with the kids. Every time, it's always a default. What do you guys
want? Poor family.
I know. Hey, my wife would be like, hey, honey, what do you want to watch? The Love Boat. That's always what I say. So, of course, I'm kidding. There's no way they're going to watch The Love Boat. But so we decided that we would watch Alf. There was, I don't know, do you know what this show is, Yancy? There's a show
I know
Alf.
of Alf, but I've never actually watched Alf.
It was like a sitcom that ran for 4 seasons, back in the 80s, and it was like this alien life form, Alf, that comes down to Earth and it causes all this mayhem and this, but the one thing that I forgot was that I watched that, series back in the 80s. So we start watching it again, and I was like, oh, I always remember there was the neighbor, Mrs. Ochmonek, and she's always trying to spy on them and see what's going on. And it's the actress, I can't remember her name, but it's the actress that plays Jerry Seinfeld's mother. I was like, hey, that's Jerry's mom. I didn't even, anyway, go back and watch these shows. But anyway, that's where it. But anyway, let's bring in our guest this week. So this week, as I mentioned last week, this week we're going to be taking a look at Blade Runner, which is one of, Yancy's favorite genres of film with the sci-fi. And so who better to join us than a huge sci-fi and Blade Runner fan, because he reached out to me and said, hey, I'm a Blade Runner fan. You got to get me on the show. Than our good friend, Derek Myers, Caveman himself. Derek, what's going on, my friend? Welcome back to the
Chris.
show. Hey.
I'm glad to be back, and let me tell you, I got to comment on a couple of things you just said. Number one, we were actually just talking about Alf in my house last week.
Very cool. See, I love
strange.
But is it, Chris? But is it cool?
I'll settle down, young man.
I'm going to give you a lot of reasons to think I'm nerdy tonight, but this is just the first one. No, and this is, again, totally off topic, down a tangent. In the series Alf, there was this whole storyline about his girlfriend back home was named Rhonda, and they were always playing the Beach Boys song, Help Me Rhonda, and we heard that song, came on the streaming party mix last week. And then that, of course, got us all talking about Alf for some strange reason. So it's kind of funny that you bring that up, Chris. It's funny how those things.
It is cool, and yes, Yancy, it is cool. By the way, so what's going on? Everybody, everyone knows Caveman. If you want to reach out to him on Twitter, you can find him at Amaron_DM. So go to Twitter, follow Caveman. He obviously knows his stuff. He's been great. Actually, I haven't had a chance to talk to you since the ZZ Top concert. So as I mentioned on the show, Derek and I obviously went to see ZZ Top together. together, and it was really great. And as much as I enjoyed the show, and I did, it was great, and another 80s staple for us. But you know, because I'm such a nerd, one of the things that I enjoyed the most about that night was before
Eric
we went
putting out.
Oh my.
That was later on in the night. But earlier in the night, one of my favorite things was, and I mentioned this on the show, Derek and I got together and we watched the whole movie of Caddyshack, and we did an entire hour and a half long commentary on it. And in all honesty, that was my favorite part of the whole night. Even though I got to go see ZZ Top. I'm such a nerd. I just love talking about this stuff. But I really enjoyed that, recording a whole hour and a half commentary on Caddyshack. And we filled it too, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. When it was over, we started by saying, I don't know if we're going to have a lot of dead air in this thing. And by the time it was over, we're like, we should do it again and just talk about all different things. And we figured we could probably do it with no problem.
There was no dead air in it. We were just going the whole time. It was, man, I love that movie. But anyway, so we're going to get into things this week. Science fiction is Yancy's favorite genre of film. That's become pretty obvious. So we decided to go back and watch an old movie from the 80s from the sci-fi genre. And one of the obviously all-time classics, and that's Blade Runner. So you guys ready to get into this?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's go. Phoebe Cates in the red bikini scene.
Jodie loves Chachis.
Gotta like it.
Didn't she die the same day as Michael Jackson?
But you did meet Fred Savage once.
Ben Savage.
Ben Savage. Because around here, Yancy is the baby-faced one, and I, of course, am the ladies' man.
I'm a huge fan of that feathered look that the women of the 60s and 70s did with their hair.
Somewhere on your smartphone there, young man. You can look it up.
Is it still around?
It was the two Corys. It was Corey Haim, Corey Feldman.
I actually felt really bad for the guy.
And I had the hugest crush on Susan Ursity.
Who are these people?
Okay, so Blade Runner. I don't know where we can start on this one. I think I'm going to let you guys kind of kick it off because I know that you're both massive fans of this movie. I would like to get a take from the millennial first, if I could. So Yancy, you love science fiction films. You've made me watch several of them from your generation. Several of them have been kind of crappy too. I'm not going to lie to you. At least I didn't like them. I'm just kidding.
You're wrong, Chris. They were all great picks, and you are wrong for disliking them.
You know what, Derek? Honestly, I knew you would say that, and I knew you'd be on my side about all this.
Every time Moon was great. Ex Machina was great. I don't know what's wrong with Chris. He normally has the textbook answer, and he obviously has not read the science fiction textbook.
I tell you, you guys are going to really hate me tonight. But anyway, so Yancy, so let's talk a little bit. You like millennial films. You like science fiction films. Here's one from 1982. But you love this movie. Is that correct?
I do love this movie. While I don't think it's a perfect film, like some people like to slap that label, and I think it is one of the best science fiction films of all time, I do think it's without flaws. And Derek, I know you probably can touch on this a little bit tonight, but I mean, the theatrical release versus the actual editor's cut, the final cut version, are two completely different films, in my opinion. If you go off the last edit version, which is the actual director's cut, which is much less narration, and the ending is a lot more kind of like ambiguous and left for interpretation, I think that is as close to a perfect science fiction film as you can possibly come. However, the theatrical version, I think, leaves a little bit to desire, especially with pacing and just having to explain and dumb down things to the audience. But as far as themes go, as far as cinematography, just the way this film is shot, all of the casting in this is phenomenal. It's weird, but it's also weirdly believable, despite the fact that they thought that this is what the world would look like in 2019 with, flying cars and a scorched earth and, super insanely advanced artificial intelligence that looks like us and is undiscernible to human beings. That part of it is kind of interesting, but it's just so well done, and there's so many themes that they bring up to it that I mean, it's in the great pantheon. It's in the Mount Rushmore, I think, of science fiction films easily. Well,
Yancy, with what's going on in foreign policy in 2017, we might get to Scorched Earth yet. So just give it a little bit of time.
I hope.
So Derek, okay, so we got the millennials' take on it. He really likes this movie. He feels that some versions of it are flawed. I'm going to come back. I got some questions for Yancy on this, but Derek, for you, you're the one that reached out to me. You were like, "Hey, man, if you're doing Blade Runner." And I think you might even been you that actually, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you might have even initiated saying, "Hey, you've got to talk about Blade Runner on the show, and I'd like to join you." So you obviously love this movie. So tell us a little bit about why you love it and why this is one of your favorite movies of all time.
Yeah. So I listen to your show every week, and a lot of the times when you guys do your top 5 lists, Chris, I find you always have, great picks, but you often have the textbook answer, and I've been saying that since day one. You pick the textbook answer, which is not the wrong answer, but I found Yancy's answers often I was felt more like my style of movie. Even if I hadn't seen all his picks, I could go, okay, yeah, I understand where he's coming from. And with your movie reviews, you've been doing a lot of stuff from the 80s, a lot of comedies, and Yancy's been doing a lot of science fiction, newer movies. And I thought, you know what, how can we sort of flip that on its head? And so that's when I reached out to you and I said, why don't you do a 1980s sci-fi movie? And I mean, I assumed Yancy had seen it and probably enjoyed it, but I didn't know for sure. So, I'm glad to hear everything that he's just said. That is certainly going to echo my feelings. But Yancy, my curiosity for you is, I saw this movie when I was much younger, shortly after it was released. I mean, when it came out, I was only 7 or 8 years old, so I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it for the first time on home video, but I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and so every science fiction movie that I saw after that, I was able to, in the back of my mind, compare it to Star Wars, compare it to Blade Runner. And this, exactly like you said, has always been in my top 5 sci-fi movies of all time. And so every sci-fi movie I've seen since then, at some part, I'm comparing it to Blade Runner, something like The Matrix or District 9 or whatever. I'm always thinking to myself, how did this stack up to Blade Runner? And so in how old were you when you first saw Blade Runner? Like, what was sort of your science fiction movie background before you saw Blade Runner? And then, like, sort of what year do you think that was? And then sort of how did you see sci-fi movies after that?
So I first saw Blade Runner when I was a senior in high school. So this wasn't a film that I grew up with. I've mentioned this before in the past that my family isn't a super science fiction-y type of family. My older brother, he's my only brother, but my brother Bruce, he likes a ton of science fiction, and he and I kind of, have always gravitated towards that type of film. But this was just one where, like, I knew that it was a big film. I knew it was like in the canon of great science fiction films, but I've never, I never watched it. It wasn't in theaters or anything like that. But with the advent of streaming services, obviously, it just makes movies so much more accessible. But that's a catch-22 though, because everything is so much more accessible, it's also much harder to kind of like discern what you're going to watch, and you almost have to be like really calculated and guided with how you spend your time. Otherwise, you're just never going to watch anything. So I was late to it, I think, compared to some other people who are, actual big science fiction fans. But senior year of high school, I watched it, and I remember watching it super late at night, and I was like, oh my God, that was incredible. And like 2 days later, I watched it again, and like 3 days later, I watched it again. And then, so I was late to it, but in the past 10 years, I mean, I've probably watched it 25 times, something like that. So I mean, it was late to the game, but it quickly like surpassed all of the films that I originally had as like the best 2 or 3 science fiction films of all time.
Okay, that's fair. I like it. That's a good answer.
Okay, can I just jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
I just want to defend myself for a second here, because you're mentioning that I'm the textbook. I give the textbook answers. I'd like you to go back and listen to the show we did on our favorite music videos, because my number one was "Holiday Rap" by MC Mike G and DJ Swen. So if that's textpook, I don't know.
Not exactly. I think I know that. Could you sing us a few bars? We haven't heard.
It gets so much play on this podcast.
It does.
Okay, so you were asking. So you mentioned you were about 14 years old, Derek, when you saw the movie. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Okay, let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back to 1982. One of my favorite things to do. So at the time, Harrison Ford was my favorite actor, because I mean he was in my 2 favorite movies of all time, Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So in 1982, I was 12 years old, and when I found out he was going to be in another science fiction movie, I begged and pleaded with my parents to please take me to the drive-in to go see this movie Blade Runner. And I just kept begging them, and then they finally gave in. And I remember I was so excited. Like, I couldn't wait. I mean, all week I was like having trouble sleeping. I was so excited to go see the new movie with, Han Solo and Indiana Jones in it. And then we got there, and the movie started, and after about 5 minutes, I was like, what the living hell am I watching? As a 12-year-old, I hated this movie. I hated it.
Did it feel like a betrayal of sorts? Like you came from like Star Wars and you were expecting something similar to that?
I think, yeah. I mean, I guess maybe because that's space fantasy, and and Star Wars is a lot of fun to watch, and it's very exciting, and it's all that. And this was like, I was like, what the hell is this? And I remember, so then I went ahead and rewatched it again as an adult, and I'll tell you what, I will run down the positive things of this movie. Okay, number 1 is Harrison Ford. The guy is amazing at anything. And you think about it, he seems like kind of an odd choice to play Deckard. But he was fantastic in this role. He was really good. So that's one thing I think that was great about the movie. The second thing I think that's great about the movie is that it has style and it has vision. No question. But the negative things about the movie. Number 1, oh God, I'm going to get in trouble for this. I think it's way overrated by science fiction fans, and number two, it's boring as That's my thoughts. That's what I feel on this.
Okay, let me jump in then. So
please address.
I'm going to speak to this, but try and spin it a little bit positive. So when my wife and I watched this movie earlier this week. She's seen it probably. She's a big sci-fi fan as well. We actually met when we were working at Blockbuster Video, so we both have this huge love of movies, and we both love sci-fi movies. So we sat down to watch it. I hadn't seen it in maybe 6 months, and she hadn't seen it in probably over a year. And we watched it, but we were sort of chatting a little bit at the same time, just because I told her, like, I'm doing homework for the podcast, like, keep me honest. And we were talking about pacing. And I was saying to her, like, the pacing is so slow. And that's her number one criticism about every movie is this movie was slow. And so I said to her, though, if you, much like you just said, Chris, if you've come to this movie for the first time after seeing Star Wars, which is also the sci-fi, but it's all shoot 'em up and space battles and hyperspace and fast, shoot 'em fast, lasers and explosions. And then you come to this, it's obviously two totally different ends of the spectrum. But I think that the kind of movie they're making, like, it's a detective story. It's a story that explores the human condition. It wants you to think. It's not just a shoot 'em up, blow 'em up, action-packed, eat your popcorn, get your 2 hours of entertainment and cheer at the end of the movie kind of thing. This one clearly – there's more going on to it. And I think that if it was a faster paced movie with more of those explosions and kinds of things, it wouldn't have sort of resonated, at least with me, it wouldn't have resonated as much over time. Like, every time I watch this, I find something new. And every time I watch this, it sort of makes you think a little bit about the whole idea of humanity, right? It's these artificial life forms that are trying to discover their soul, if you will, before their life ends. Like, they realize they have mortality, and they're trying to extend that mortality because they're starting to become individuals. And for me, that's what I love about this so much. Is it's not just this shoot 'em up space battles set in the future with robots. It's this story about a detective, and it's this story about these robots trying to discover their souls.
I'm going to jump in. I think it's interesting you say that because I'm going to play devil's advocate tonight. Okay. So you're saying, like, you watch it and then you find out there's more and more going on. I actually would argue the opposite. To me, this movie is all style. It's like every shot is done just to be stylish. And a lot of it I know is because of that floating kind of advertising sign thing that's going on. So there's all this backlit and light coming in and shafts of light coming in all the time. Everything's backlit. Everything's in silhouette. Shafts of light everywhere. It's all style and not a lot of substance. That's just my feeling when I watch this movie. The movie feels empty to me. It feels like a really kind of interesting thing to look at. Very stylized. Like I think when I think of a stylized movie, Blade Runner is it. It's a wonderfully stylized movie. But there's been other movies that have been stylized. Like, if you think around the same time, remember Buckaroo Banzai? Super stylized kind of movie, very visually interesting, but kind of a dumb movie. And I kind of lumped this movie in with that one. I know you're going to hate me for that.
No, but Chris, sorry, I'm just going to jump back in before Yancy comes back in.
Yeah.
I have to agree with what you've said, but I think that's sort of the point is, at this point in the movie, in the world, those who are privileged and perfect and want to have a better life have left. They've gone to these off-world colonies. And you even hear the characters complain about, I couldn't go off-world. I couldn't pass the physical.
Why are you still on Earth? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, this is the dystopia. This is the place that nobody wants to be. The only people who are here are the people that can't leave. And usually it's because they're down on their luck, they're impoverished, they're criminal, they're sick, whatever. And so your point about the movie sort of being hollow, and like, I think that's deliberate. It's supposed to be this style. It's like, yes, it's the future, but sorry, you can't participate in the future because you suck. And this is your story.
Yeah, I guess. You're coming from two different points. And sorry, Yancy, I'll let you jump, because I think, because the movie's kind of a downer. And I think that there is a propensity for some film critics and, some film buffs out there to think that this downer dystopian thing is, kind of cool. And I guess it is kind of cool, but still, it doesn't change the fact that the movie's kind of a downer. And I guess, I got to put things in perspective. I was 12 at the time, and like I said, coming off Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, I came into this and went, what the hell, right? So, Yancy, go ahead.
So I think, Chris, with you, a lot of the reasons why, or maybe the main reason, and if this is totally off base, then just shut it down. That's fine. And I don't mean to sound like I'm like coming at you with this, but I think with a lot of these sci-fi movies that I recommend to you, I think that they don't resonate with you because the main theme or like the main, issue or whatever theme that they're trying to say as far as like our relationship to technology and how that like affects society in the future, I think overall you have a different relationship with technology, and like you don't have that embedded fear, and it doesn't play up to you like it does for other people, right? So what I see is like a really big deal with like a District 9 of how like, hey, say, a different subsect of species comes into our planet and basically, has nowhere else to go. Like I see that as something as more of an actual real possibility. And it's also like, it's a metaphor for how we treat people today as far as like, refugees and stuff. Whereas like with this, it's like, okay, eventually, we're going to have artificial intelligence that is so far advanced that we're going to have to reconcile how do we treat those things that are so close to mankind, right? So like I think about that in like an actual literal sense and how that's going to have an application in the real world, down the road in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I think you just see that as just like that's just the theme, like the core theme of that movie, and it's purely fiction. You see what I'm saying? Like what I'm deriving from Blade Runner is how is this going to have real life ramifications down the road? Does that make sense?
Yep. And I remember when I was mentioning to my wife that I was going to watch this movie, she's like, well, what's it about? And so I mentioned it to her, and she's like, what the heck is it with this recurring theme? Because when we watched Ex Machina, it was the same thing. This idea of this artificial intelligence that kind of gets, a conscience and kind of comes to life and then wrestles with that whole thing, and then does it turn on people,
Right.
And we saw the same theme when my wife and I watched Westworld, right? It was the exact same thing as what's going on here. And so what you're saying is that millennials are maybe more prone to having that sort of embedded fear of technology and stuff, so these themes resonate.
Or not even fear, but just awareness.
Awareness
like
of
an
it.
actual
Okay,
awareness
right.
of it. Yeah.
So then the thing is, if we look at this movie was made in 1982, so I guess that's what that's telling us is that this movie was way ahead of its time, and that's another reason why it was so popular, right?
Yeah, I was just going to jump onto that. Yeah. So to echo what you've been saying, Chris, to echo what you've said in a lot of these reviews is, the whole idea of looking at this technology and as this, this fear, artificial intelligence taking over. This obviously is a movie from the 80s. A lot of movies and other pop culture that have come since then have been influenced by this, been influenced by like William Gibson's cyberpunk novels and that kind of thing, right? You have a few giants in the genre, and everything that comes after that is, as much as they may want to deny it, has been influenced by these things. So yes, Blade Runner is stylistic, and yes, it's got these things, but you got to think of it in the context of, well, it was among the first of the big sort of sci-fi blockbuster Hollywood. Well, I don't know if you call it blockbuster, but Hollywood releases to visit these topics and visit these themes in this way. And so, although you may not think it's perfect, you may not love it, you may not even like it, you do, I think, at least have to acknowledge that it has an important place in science fiction pop culture because of all of the things it's influenced and inspired, for good or for bad, from then. So, like you talk about style. We just recently watched the movie The Fifth Element. My niece was visiting. She's 15 years old. She likes sci-fi. She'd never seen The Fifth Element, so we showed that. You want to talk about a movie that's style.
That is all.
It's a bad, good movie.
Yeah.
It is the opposite end of Blade Runner. Blade Runner is all dark and dystopian, and Fifth Element is all colors and like it's both ends, but
it's all like over the top. Yeah.
Yeah. You could apply a lot of the same criticisms and descriptors that you're using for Blade Runner. You could use a lot of those same things for something like Fifth Element. And again, it borrows on them, it's influenced by them in a way, and then they've sort of, obviously flipped it on its head and taken it away, and they've made a fun movie out of it.
Now, Yancy, you always mention one thing that I think that's interesting, because you and I have, sort of conflicting views on rewatchability of movies. Because you're saying like
Yep.
you could watch movies over and over and over again for totally different reasons than I do. I like watching movies over and over again for the familiarity of them and kind of, all that. Like when Caveman, when we got together and watched Caddyshack, it was like, like I've seen the movie a zillion times. I didn't care. I loved watching it again because it's so familiar and it's a fun place to go, This movie, like, I don't know if I could watch it over and over again. I just couldn't. I haven't watched it over and over again over the years. I'm not going to start now, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. So why is it that you like watching it over and over again? You get something different out of it every time?
I think because it's so there's a lot of it that is super ambiguous, like I said, especially if you're not watching the final director's cut. There's a lot that's left open for interpretation, just like I've talked about with The Matrix, how this movie has legs, and there are so many different theories on theories that just, you can continuously see different lights and different meanings to a lot of stuff. I also think that this movie, because like the grand reveal, it does kind of ruin it, and there's not that surprise factor with this, but because it is so like freaking aesthetically pleasing, like especially like the huge streetscapes, whenever Ridley Scott does like these expansive cityscapes where you just see like tons of buildings and all these different neon lights and people on the bottom, and like I said, like the scorched earth where you see like it's those big expanses. I think he does really, really well at. And just from a visual aesthetic, like I think this is the textbook, have this movie on in the background, maybe not pay like intense attention to it every single time, but I just enjoy watching it so much that I think that's what gives it a lot of its rewatchability. What do you think, Caveman?
Yeah, go ahead, Caveman.
Yeah, so I think I was going to go in this direction, but I was going to take it in a slightly different way. So I'm going to talk about The Matrix for a second. One of the things, so I love The Matrix almost as much as I love this Blade Runner movie, and I've probably seen The Matrix, if I said it was 50 times, that's probably a low estimate. Like, I've watched The Matrix a ton. And one of the things I love about The Matrix on DVD, or at least the version I have, is there is an audio music score track. So you can put the music on, or the movie on, and kill all the dialogue, and you're just hearing the audio score and the sound effects. And for me, that is a big part of what I love about The Matrix, is I think that the music really adds something to what is already a fantastic movie. Mm-hmm. Blade Runner is another movie where the score is phenomenal. You've got Vangelis, who I believe either won or was nominated for an Oscar for Chariots of Fire.
He won. He
did win. Yeah, I thought so. He was, at the time of this, when this movie came out, it's like he was at the top of his game. He was a desired person to have do your movie music. And the Blade Runner music, for me, although it does have synthesizers and sounds from the 80s, I've seen some bad. So like Lady Hawk is a good example. It's got Rutger Hauer, who happens to be in Blade Runner.
Yep.
It came out in the mid 80s, and it has this 80s pop techno synthesized score. If you try and watch the movie Lady Hawk today, you cannot focus on the movie because the score is all 80s pop, and it ruins the whole movie. It just does not hold up. Whereas Blade Runner, the music, even though it does have those 80s influences, I mean, keep in mind it was composed in 81 and released in 82, so this would have even been 70s influence. It doesn't, to me, sound dated. And this Vangelis score, for me, is just one more reason to love this movie. And when they finally released it on DVD in, I want to say it was the early 90s, I couldn't buy it fast enough. And I often just put that CD back on the player and, just get that audio score of the Vangelis Blade Runner. And for me, that's a huge, huge, huge plus of why I would recommend this movie to someone if they haven't seen it in a while to go back and watch it, or if they've never seen it before, but maybe they're not a huge sci-fi fan. It's one of those subtle things where you never say to someone, "Hey, go watch this movie. The score is fantastic." But knowing, if you're a big movie guy, especially if you're like an 80s music person, it's like, you can recommend this, and then you say, keep your ear open for the score in the background. And to me, it just I couldn't imagine this movie without the score or with a different score.
And it's so funny you mentioned that, because that year, when you talk about the Oscars, the Blade Runner was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. It was nominated for Best Art Direction and Best Visual Effects, but it wasn't nominated for Best Original Score.
Travesty.
E.T. was up, Gandhi, Officer and a Gentleman, Poltergeist, and Sophie's Choice were all determined by the Academy to be ahead of this movie. And after all,
Poltergeist? Really? Poltergeist?
Yeah. Best original score. E.T. won, but John Williams, of course. But very
Hey, really quick, can I jump in real quick with a question that I wanted to ask Caveman? So let me ask you this. Like I said, I watched this as a senior in high school, and I still appreciate a lot of it. I think that, like I said, aesthetically, as far as cinematography goes, it is very, very beautiful. There are some elements to it that I think are a little clunky. One criticism I've heard from Ridley Scott, and I kind of pick up on a little bit myself. This may just be confirmation bias, just because I read it and then I noticed it and all of a sudden I see it everywhere, is that he's really good, like I said, at like big things. Whenever it comes to little things on air, it kind of looks clunky. On video, it looks clunky, right? So it's kind of hard for me to say that this movie like holds up as far as digital effects goes, just because like when they show him like interacting with like a screen, or like it shows graphics that are akin to the 1980s. Obviously, if he made it look super futuristic, that means that we have the ability to make displays look super futuristic in 1982, and all displays would have looked like that. You know what I mean? So I can understand that, like, you know, we see flying cars and everything is super, super advanced, but they're still dealing with like single block, like 8-bit screens. So that part kind of ages it a little bit. Yeah. But how do you feel? How do you feel as far as like the overarching like aesthetic? Like, if you watch this movie in 2030, having never seen it before, I mean, would this movie look super, super dated, or do you think it kind of holds up as like a futuristic kind of sci-fi film?
I do think it would hold up, but yeah, to your point, there are always going to be bits and pieces. And the one that we find that we are, my wife and I, we watch sci-fi movies, especially older sci-fi movies, that we are often overcritical of, as often as you see things like flying cars and other travel, space travel kind of thing, that you're watching it, a movie from the 70s or the 80s, and you're going, hey, it's 2017. Yeah, I can see that happening, even though it's 30 years old. Very, very few movies got the telecommunications revolution correct. So you see in this movie, Harrison Ford goes to a payphone to make a call. And so that, my wife sort of laughed at that when we watched it. She goes, yeah, like nobody in the future has a cell phone. And I'm like, well, again, in 1982, that was not something that anyone would have imagined ever would exist. So it's those kinds of things that I do definitely feel date the movie. But I did find it funny that even though he makes this call, the amount of money that he's charged for
$1.25
$1.25 for a 40-second call, and it said, they did the math on one of the sites I was looking at, and they said, like, yeah, it works out to be like almost $2 a minute. And I'm like, that's not that far off considering that we're almost in 2019. So you know, some of those little details they may have tried to sort of do it as to get a laugh at the time that have actually become, you know, almost the reality. But other things, there's little details that are going to seem dated. You know, obviously we don't have flying cars, but we have cell phones, so you can't get it all right.
Now, Yancy, you mentioned that you like the way this movie looked, and you like the sort of the sweeping panorama of the film, and when it showed the street scenes and stuff. Obviously, in 1982, CGI didn't exist. This is all done with sets and, you know, with paint and
which is so hard. It's so hard for me to picture how that would look. Like, I want to see what a set looks like panned out and see people standing next to it. Like, was this small stuff like what they do with some of the Star Wars stuff, or like I don't even know like what that looks like now, because I'm so what's the word, like, just used to seeing these full CGI. Like, I don't even know what like a practical set would even look like. Like, it's hard for me.
Well, I think the real test will be, we've got a Blade Runner sequel coming out later this year, and I got to think that that's going to be 100% digital effects. Like, they're not going to be doing miniatures and matte painting. So I think that when that comes out, and I really cross my fingers that this movie is even halfway decent, because if it sucks, I'm going to be so disappointed. But the trailer looks amazing. I think after seeing this new version, that's where you're going to be able to sort of do that apples to apples comparison and go, well, in 1982 they did models and matte paintings, and in 2017 they did digital effects, and you'll be able to sort of compare the two and go, do they look like they're from the same world? Does it look like this is part of the same franchise? Because I think that you see movies, and I even hate to bring up this blasphemy, but you look at Star Wars episodes 1, 2, 3, where everything is digital, and a lot of that stuff doesn't look like it's part of the Star Wars world that I knew from A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back.
I've been saying that since episode 1 on this show.
I love you always have that in the teaser where you're like, good and bad special effects starts and ends with George Lucas. Exactly. I'm like, oh, that, Chris, we're putting that on your tombstone. Like, that's perfect.
So speaking of this sequel, the Blade Runner 2049, that's coming out in October of this year. Obviously, you're obviously excited to go and see it. This is something you want to go and see. Both of you are excited about it, I'm assuming. Yancy, you too?
Yeah, I've watched the trailers on it multiple times. It honestly looks really good. And like Caveman said, like, I want it to hold up so bad. I mean, because if it sucks, it's really going to piss me off, to be honest with you. I have like a lot riding on this emotion. Like, you know, when the new Star Wars movies came out, like, man, I was fully invested for 2 years watching trailers. I mean, I was on sites, you know, fan theories, everything like that, really, really into this. And I'm kind of like that right now. It's a little different because this isn't like a full-fledged franchise that they're rebooting or revisiting. So it's not the same level of emotional attachment or involvement, but I want this movie to be good, like, so desperately bad.
It'll be interesting because, you know, like Caveman brought up some good points. The new movie is going to have a lot of CGI in it, so how's it going to fit in, you know, with the other movie? Yep. And so it's going to be interesting because their choice of director I thought was interesting. Denis Villeneuve was an interesting pick because have you seen Prisoners? Have either of you guys seen Prisoners?
I have not.
It's good.
Is that the one with Jake Gyllenhaal?
Yeah, good movie, really good. But the absolute opposite of a sci-fi movie, about as opposite as you can get. And so, but I really liked Prisoners a lot. So this would be interesting to see how he's going to tackle this movie, because I don't see him as being a Ridley Scott type. You know what I mean? So it'd be very interesting.
Now, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but this director that's doing the new Blade Runner, this is the same guy that did the movie Arrival?
Yes, that's right.
And I sure hope you've seen this movie, because it was arguably my favorite movie last year.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to go and watch it, because I have not seen Arrival yet. That's one with Amy Adams, right?
It just dropped on Netflix, so
okay.
I don't want to tell you guys how to do your show, but Yancy, when you got to pick your next movie review, tell Chris to watch Arrival.
Okay, I was all over Arrival. I love that movie, and there's a huge undercurrent of people who say Arrival sucks, because I don't think they got it. But it is an amazing, amazing film.
Let me guess, Yancy.
You and I are like spirit animals, dude.
Yeah, let me guess, Yancy. You think I'm going to fall into that category that thinks Arrival sucks? And who knows?
Yeah, Chris, I don't get the point.
What did you guys think? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, again, a little off topic. So my wife's a sign language interpreter, and I'm a writer. I work in communications, and so the two of us, in our own way, work in the communications field and have been educated in the communications field, and communication is a big part of our lives. And this movie Arrival is all about communicating with aliens. And so I think the fact that we both liked it so much, but for very different reasons. And then after we saw the movie, I actually saw it when it premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. I guess it was last year. And then when it was released in the theater, my wife and I went and saw it together. And so it was my second time through. And then when it came out on video, we watched it again together. And like every time since then, we've watched it a few times together. We always talk about it after. And it creates this very interesting dialogue. And I really think, knowing your background, that you're going to get a lot more out of it than you might think.
Well, you know what other movie was about communicating with aliens? Close Encounters.
Never seen it. No, I'm just kidding. Of course I've seen it.
So was E.T., because E.T. had to phone home. But anyway, again, just got to throw in my Gen X. So I have a quick question for you guys on Blade Runner. What about the supporting cast? What do you guys think about this? Like Rutger Hauer and Sean Young. Did you think it was a really strong supporting cast? You're happy with everybody? I thought everyone was very interesting.
Yancy, you want to jump in first?
I thought the casting was all good. There were decisions as far as costumes go that I thought was just a little bit questionable. Like Daryl Hannah's character, was it Priest or Priest? I can't remember how to say her name. But it was kind of like over the top. It was almost to the point of like distracting to me. Like if you're really trying to kind of like insert yourself into like human society, like why are you going to be so outlandishly different than everybody else from an aesthetical standpoint? But
is it because of like the eye makeup or the hair or the
both
cosplay, everything? And I think you make a good point, because to me that kind of hit me as being it's just like the movie is being stylistic just for the sake of being stylistic.
Just for the sake of it, yeah. But I mean, that aside, I thought Sean Young as Rachel was just absolutely stunning. Where you believed that she was an actual android who was reconciling the fact that she was an android. Like I thought that that's something really hard to play. That's not something they teach you in like theater school or anything like that. But she led me to believe that like she was truly, she thought she was a human being and she wasn't, and when she finds that out, to, having to grapple with that, like her own sense of humanity or lack thereof, I thought was really, really interesting. What was the guy's name? The guy that had like the gland issue or whatever,
J.F. Sebastian. Yeah. William Sanderson.
I thought he was absolutely incredible in that. I would have loved to have seen him have even more dialogue in that, but I thought the casting as a whole was amazing. Like you said earlier, Chris, Harrison Ford, he doesn't even have to say a whole lot for you to kind of know exactly what's going on and like see what he's thinking, and like just his little one lines, the way he delivers his lines. I mean, he's the all-time grossing actor of all time, and it makes a lot of sense that he is too, because he's just so good at playing one specific part so well. I think he just says a lot without actually having to say much at all. But I loved it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I mentioned earlier when we started the podcast, like Harrison Ford was like my favorite actor, when I was like 12 years old, because he played he's amazing to me because he plays these iconic characters. Like if you go back and think about Star Wars, he's Han Solo. Like it is so incredibly easy as an actor to get pigeonholed and typecast, and that's it. And when you think about someone like Mark Hamill's gone on to have a great career as a voice actor, but his on-screen stuff, it died, with Jedi pretty much, like, because he was just so typecast in that. And even Carrie Fisher was typecast in that role. But Harrison Ford was able to break free of that. And it's just amazing because when you watch a movie like Witness, and I think Yancy has no idea what I'm talking about with Witness, but Cave, Witness, right?
Yep. Oscar nominated. Harrison Ford got nominated for an Oscar for that.
So good, John Booth. And you watch that, and he's just so incredible. I swear to God, the fan that I am of Raiders, of Star Wars and everything, I watched Witness when it came out, and even to this day, I've seen it, multiple times. Every time I watch that movie, there is not 1 second in that movie that I look at him and I think, that's Han Solo, or that's Indiana Jones. Not once. Not once does that even come up. That, to me, is an incredible actor to be able to transcend such huge parts and still play other parts, and that's what he did in this movie, which kind of surprised me.
Chris, I don't think I've ever watched Harrison Ford in a film and thought, like, oh, that's... like you said, that's Han Solo. I remember, I've seen, I love The Office, and I'll see actors from The Office, and I'll be like, oh, that's Dwight from The Office. You know what I mean? And it's so hard to kind of parse that just because, not to their fault, but, like, their character is just so iconic, and it's so hard to break away from that. But, like, I remember a couple years ago, I went in theaters, and I watched The Age of Adeline. It's kind of like a forgettable throwaway, like, romantic comedy. But with that being said, Blake Lively's lovely in it. It's a good movie. It's okay. It's fine. But Harrison Ford in that is like, whoa. Like, Harrison Ford is like, he's so awesome and out of place in this movie. Like, why did he agree to do this movie? He was so good in it. You know what I mean? Like a forgettable movie, a throwaway, like, summer romantic comedy, and he just completely, like, dominated it. Like, it's, it's hard to say he's unheralded as, like, an all-time great just because, like, look at all the commercial success he has. But, like, when you think about great actors, people always say, like, Tom Hanks, those types of names. And nobody ever really talks about Harrison Ford. And, like, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, you mentioned Sean Young as well, and Sean Young's an interesting case because I thought you made an interesting observation about her role in this as Rachel and how she kind of was kind of coming to grips with the fact that she thinks she's human and she's really an android and this and that. And so the one thing with Sean Young is, like, she's an incredibly talented actress. And it was funny because there was a period of time right around 82 where she was like an up and coming star. Like, and when she did movies like remember when I mentioned to you on a previous podcast, Yancy, of one of my favorite comedies from the 80s is called Young Doctors in Love. Sean Young was in that. And she was also in Stripes, one of my favorite movies of all time. And she was also in this movie called No Way Out with Kevin Costner, one of his first movies. And it's such a good movie. She was an incredible actress, but then she kind of fell off the face of the earth. And not really, because, I mean, she's worked ever since. She's been a working actress ever since and has done lots of stuff, but nothing really substantial because she is just so absolutely batshit crazy. Like, she is absolutely crazy. Like there's been stories of her, like, getting kicked out of parties and stuff in Hollywood and, like, just really, really difficult to work with. I think if you ask directors in Hollywood who's the most difficult actors to work with, she's right near the top. And I remember even when she did Wall Street, like, it was like she was impossible to work with. And then at one point she was dating James Woods, the actor, and then apparently, like, the rumors were that she was, like, stalking him after they broke up and stuff. And I think when you're looking at a situation between you and James Woods and you're the crazy one, you're really, really crazy. You know what I'm saying? But I thought Rutger Hauer was really, really good in this too. I remember seeing him in a movie called Nighthawks with Sylvester Stallone, and he was really, really good in that too, and The Austrian Weekend and stuff. Like, he's really good. This was a good cast. It was a good cast. It was a stylish movie. Again, just to play devil's advocate more than anything else. I actually did kind of like this movie a lot, but I really wanted to play devil's advocate tonight on a lot of things. But overall, I thought it was really, really good. So
just to hop in one more time, Chris.
Yes, of course.
So I totally agree with you, Chris. Actually, what I wrote down in my notes, just preparing for, like, talking points for tonight, was the pacing, and I knew that would be something that would come up tonight. This could be a 90-minute movie if they really wanted it to be, and it would still say all the same things. And I do acquiesce to that. I do think that that's something that's a legitimate point.
It could be a half-hour TV show and come across.
Fair enough. But,
I'm just being honest. Like, I'm just...
Yeah, really no. I totally agree with you. I totally agree. There are scenes that just take forever, and they don't have to. Yeah. The second act of the film just lasts forever sometimes, and it feels like nothing is happening, and I totally agree with that. Caveman, this is your movie. I wanted to give you just, like, the last word, basically, to kind of talk about, one, the difference between the director's cut that came out and versus the theatrical version, and just kind of like what your overall take is of this movie, where it stands as far as, like, the Mount Rushmore of your science fiction films. And can you give us, like, a 0 through 10 rating on this overall? Sure. Like, what would you give this?
Yeah. So I'm glad, because that was what I had. My last note here was talk about director's cut. So I don't know about you guys, but I love music, and when I hear a song for the first time, and I like it, that's the version. And there's been a lot of times in my life where I've heard a song and go, wow, that's a great song. And then you find out it's a cover. And you go back and you listen to the original and you go, that original's not that good. I totally get why they covered it. This cover is so much better. But then there's a lot of other times where you hear the song when it first comes out by the original artist, and then years later someone covers it and you're like, oh, dude, you're killing this song. Why did you do this? And I have found the people that like Blade Runner, it's like that. If the first version you ever saw was the director's cut, that tends to be your favorite. Whereas if the first version you ever saw was the theatrical cut, that tends to be the one you like more. And for me, that's exactly the case. The first one I saw was the theatrical cut with the voiceover. And so for me, that's my version. And part of it is like the biggest change between the director's cut and the theatrical release, the original theatrical release, is there's this voiceover by Harrison Ford where he's talking and narrating and telling you what's going on. I know the movie so well, I've seen it so many times, that when I watch the director's cut, in my mind, I'm hearing the dialogue anyway. So I feel for me, the director's cut, I'm not getting the same experience out of it because the real version has sort of ruined it for me. I can't really enjoy what the director thinks I should be enjoying. And yeah, there's the whole idea of, is Deckard a replicant? And the extra scene where he has the dream of the unicorn and at the end with the unicorn origami. And there's a lot of crazy theories, maybe not so crazy, about what this represents and you know, why the director has always said from day one that he believed that Harrison Ford's character was a replicant, and Harrison Ford has sort of gone back and forth on it himself. Personally, because my version that I know and love is the original version, I do not think Deckard's a replicant. And I don't read any more into the unicorn origami than the idea of the Sean Young's character Rachel is the unicorn. It's, she won't live, but who does? She's got a 4-year lifespan. If you want to run off and play doctor with her, great, but she's not going to be around very long, so enjoy it while it lasts. And the idea of this unicorn is you've found this perfect woman, and look, she's a robot. To me, that's always what the unicorn represented, and so for me, that's the version I know and love. But I know a lot of people that love the director's cut, and they think the voiceover is blasphemous. Even Harrison Ford himself said he didn't want to do the voiceover, and he deliberately tried to do it poorly so they wouldn't use it. That's just it. But for me, I got to give Blade Runner probably a 9 out of 10. It's one of those movies when you say you're on a desert island and you can bring 5 movies, but apparently on this desert island you have power and a television and a Blu-ray player. What movies do you want to bring with you? Blade Runner usually makes my top 5. It definitely makes a top 10 list for me. It's usually right on the cusp of that 5 if I'm narrowing it down to 5, but it absolutely is in the top of my sci-fi. I put it right there next to the first Star Wars movie, Blade Runner, and The Matrix. Got to be my top 3 sci-fi in that order.
So Yancy, so you answered my question, the last question I was going to throw out, and that was, do you think Deckard is a replicant? Derek thinks no. Yancy, what are your thoughts? Is Deckard a replicant? Yes or no?
So in the director's cut, it kind of makes it pretty obvious that he is. I think it takes that ambiguousness and it makes it pretty blatant, and that's the grapple that I have with the theatrical version with all of the narration, where it's basically like, I feel like it's dumbing down the film for a more mass audience. That was basically like the theaters trying to like not the theaters, but like the companies themselves trying to like put their hands in on an artist's vision and making it more accessible to the masses, and I don't really agree with that. Personally, I always thought he was a replicant the entire time, and I think that makes the whole the entire story becomes even more interesting if you do add into the fact that he is a replicant. And so it's one of those things. It's like the X-Files, like I want to believe kind of thing. So I want to say yes. I personally think he is, but I think the magic of this film and the magic of most films is like if you leave something up for interpretation to where it can have a life, decades afterwards, where people are still discussing it, and different groups can think different things. I think that's absolutely perfect.
Okay, so the thing is obviously you both make really good points. I think when Edward James Olmos' character makes the unicorn origami and leaves it at the end, obviously that is showing that he saw his dream. He was able to access it somehow, so therefore he is a replicant. But if they're making this sequel, it's Blade Runner 2049, and that's 30 years after this movie was supposed to take place. And if a replicant only has a 4-year lifespan, he couldn't be in the sequel. So he cannot be a replicant. That's the argument that I'm going to make.
Yeah, and I got to agree with that.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and by the way, they never talk about how important it is, the fact that these replicants only last for what is it, 4 years? But yet they make such a big deal about killing them. They never talk about that in the film at all. Like, if it's such a big deal that they're there.
I think they do bring it up because early in the movie he brought it up with Emmett Walsh's character. He brings up, he says, yeah, it's going to die in 4 years, but we can't take chances of who it might kill in the meantime.
Oh, that's fair.
That was the reason why Deckard had to go after them, right?
Good job, Chris. Look at you.
There
man.
you go. Huh?
And so with that logic, even that's why I never felt that Deckard was a replicant, because I wouldn't think that a police captain like Bryant, who was so clearly biased against them, would let Deckard just walk around with a gun and a badge. There's no backstory that you can give me, given the slice of life of these characters that we know from the 2-hour movie, that would allow me to believe he would go for that.
I agree. Yep. No, I think that you're right. So again, and this is one of the things, like you said, Harrison Ford has been adamant over the years that his character wasn't, and I think it just more recently, he's just, okay, finally I give in. Okay, Ridley, whatever, believe what you want, but I think Harrison Ford has always believed that he isn't. Okay, so anyway, that's lots of conversation on Blade Runner. So now, how about if we get to some trivia? Are you guys ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's play some
Fun with Yancy.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys some trivia, because you guys both love this movie a heck of a lot more than I do. So I'm going to throw trivia out. I'm just going to throw it out there, and either one of you can jump in. Derek's probably going to jump in with lots of these, so we'll see what's going on. Okay, so in the novel that the movie is based on, the term replicant is never used, not once. Instead, the creatures are called what?
Andes.
Yeah, Andes or androids, obviously, because it's
Yep.
do androids dream of electric sheep? So that's a pretty obvious one. So there you go.
Yancy, have you read the book?
I have not. Is that blasphemous?
Okay. No, the book is very different than the movie. It's only it's like a novella. It's only like about 150 pages, and it's very different. There's only a couple of scenes in the movie that are influenced by the book, but it's very much the broad strokes of this dystopian future. So.
Okay, guys, in the movie, Deckard is only ever referred to by his last name. Deckard, of course. Even though it's never mentioned in the movie even once. What's Deckard's first name?
I had the IMDb page open, so I'm going to defer this to Yancy.
I can't remember, but I believe that you know it, so.
Yeah, it's Rick.
No, it's Yancy. No, I'm just totally kidding. It's Rick, of course.
That would make my day. Why are you playing with my emotions like that?
Yeah. Okay, guys. You guys have mentioned a couple times on tonight's podcast, so I'm going to circle it back to this about the levitating cars. Now, they are obviously prominent throughout the movie, but they are not referred to as levitating cars. They actually have a name. So, gentlemen, can either of you tell me the name of the levitating cars in this movie?
I cannot.
No, I read it earlier this week when I was doing some homework, but no, I can't.
They're spinners.
Spinners.
Yeah. Okay. J.F. Sebastian, you mentioned this one earlier, Cave. Obviously played by William Sanderson. And Cave mentioned William Sanderson, so you know William Sanderson.
Yeah,
he's an actor, obviously well known in the 80s for his role on a sitcom. Can you name the sitcom that William Sanderson played a small but very memorable part on?
I know it. Yancy, any idea?
What do you think?
I will give you a hint. Hi, I'm Daryl, and this is my brother Larry, and this is my other brother Larry.
No, drawing a blank, man. What is it?
Okay, it's Newhart.
It's Newhart, but you actually got that wrong because it's actually I'm Larry, and this is my brother Daryl.
My other brother Daryl.
Daryl. Well, close. So get ahead of yourself.
That was a deliberate attempt to try and trick Yancy, I swear.
Yes. Well,
was that a pretty big show, or was that kind of like a really obscure, like 1 or 2 season kind of show in the 80s?
No, it was a pretty popular show.
It was pretty big.
Yes, okay. I tell you. Oh man. Okay, so we talked about different cuts of this movie. Okay, so believe it or not, Ridley Scott's original cut of the film was over 4 hours, and so obviously it didn't miss a whole lot, when he first put it out there, and then he obviously re-released that as a director's cut, years later and different versions. But the one thing that his original cut of the film was missing was one key part of the film that was in the theatrical release. You've mentioned it already tonight, so I know you're going to get it. What's the one key component of the theatrical release that was not part of the original cut of the film?
Go ahead, Caveman.
I don't know. I got to guess probably the score.
No, close.
Or maybe the happy ending.
No.
The voiceover.
The voiceover.
Yeah,
they had to go and put that. The studio insisted on putting the voiceover in there because they felt people wouldn't understand what the heck's going on in this dumb movie. Harrison Ford obviously played Rick Deckard. We know that. But can you guys, I love this, behind the scenes stuff. And we always talk about this every week. Can either of you guys name who Ridley Scott's first choice was to play the role?
I know this again only because I looked up some trivia earlier this week.
It'll blow you away. You want to say who it is?
David Hasselhoff. No,
that's right. That's totally right, Yancy.
Actually, the initials are right. You know who it is, Cave?
No, I don't think I do. I thought I had read somewhere that the actor who played Holden, who gets shot at the very beginning of the movie, I thought that they wanted him to play the Deckard role.
No, actually, surprisingly enough, Ridley Scott wanted Dustin Hoffman to play the part.
No.
Yes. Could you imagine Dustin Hoffman playing this part? I mean, like, you talk about a versatile actor, and, I was mentioning before how Harrison Ford is such a versatile actor. You don't get much more versatile than Dustin Hoffman, but I still could not imagine Dustin Hoffman playing this part. That would be something else, let me tell you.
I mean, Dustin Hoffman can play Rain Man, so, I'm going to give him a lot, the benefit of the doubt, but, whoa, Dustin Hoffman, seriously? That was his first choice?
I think maybe, if you go back and watch something like Marathon Man, that's probably where he might have got some of this from. I don't know, but, it just seems like an odd one, that's for sure. Anyway, Cave, I want to say thanks a lot for joining us this week. I really appreciate you reaching out to us and suggesting this film. It made for a great topic. I really enjoyed playing Devil's Advocate tonight. It was a lot of fun. It's one of Yancy's favorite movies, even though it's from my generation, or our generation for that matter. So really, really appreciate you coming on the show. You're going to come back again sometime and join us, though, right?
Of course. Actually, Chris, before we go, can I throw a trivia question out at you?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so can you name the song by a one-hit wonder from the 80s that did sampling in the song from both Blade Runner and A Clockwork Orange?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, jeepers.
Can you name the song?
I'll give you a hint.
Give me a hint, at least.
The song was prominently featured in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Is it Oh Yeah?
It is not.
Oh, I don't know.
It is Love Missile F-111 by Zig Zig Sputnik.
Oh, wow. That is the biggest nerd trivia question I've ever heard in my entire life.
I'm a big fan of obscure 80s music, especially obscure 80s dance music.
Oh, I thought you were going to say I'm a big nerd, which would have been true.
That goes without saying.
Yeah. You fit right in around here, that's for sure.
Place. Chris, ask me what I'm doing next week on my vacation.
What are you doing next week on your vacation?
Oh, it's funny you ask. I am going to Indianapolis to participate in the 50th Gen Con gaming convention to play Dungeons and Dragons and board games for 4 solid days. The best 4 days in gaming. That is my vacation.
Okay.
That
I'm out.
What's the name of the convention?
Gen Con. It's the 50th year of Gen Con. It's in Indianapolis. We're going down. There's a whole crew of us jumping in the cars and heading down. I've been going for the last 10 years. It is a blast.
What does your wife refer to this conference as?
Oh, she doesn't go anywhere near this. She's like, you go and have fun at your nerd convention.
Does she call it anything?
She calls it the Nerd Convention.
Yeah, there you go. How appropriate. All right, okay, good one. Okay, anyway, listen, thanks for joining us this week again. Caveman, it's always a pleasure having you on. We're going to have you back
again.
Thanks
for having me. Appreciate it, guys.
You always do a good job. Always do a good job on the show. Yancy, thank you very much, young man, for everything. I'm really happy at least that you liked a movie from my generation. Next week we'll come back, we'll do a top 5. In the meantime, this is Chris McBride for Yancy Eden, and of course for Caveman Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at @CMcBrien or @Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.